saw these photos of these two men, suspect one and suspect two, what kind of reaction do you have?
They reminded me of Timothy McVeigh, the NRA member who blew up the Murray building in Oklahoma as payback to the ATF and FBI.
I think there's a militia kind of thing going on here, do you not? Like a Patriots Day.
You are on the Midnight Ride! Majestic reaches of the Union, out to the last. Welcome to historic Lexington and the InfoWars Paul Revere contest. My name is Tricon Tom.
And I'm Rachel the Bomb.
And you are on the Midnight Ride! Huzzah! Hey Alex, how do you like my New England cowboy hat? Anyway, we're here today to talk about Paul Revere, the revolutionary generation, and awakenings. Wake up, America! Now, what you should know about that revolutionary generation is they were the sons and grandsons of something called the Great Awakening, in which the entire nation, North and South, woke up and had a great national revival to the power, truth, and love of Jesus Christ. This right here is the grave of Reverend John Hancock, who preached for 50 years right here in Lexington, and his grandson was the John Hancock that signed the Declaration of Independence nice and big so King George could read it without his spectacles. The first thing that they would want us to do is to have another Great Awakening and turn back to God. This past Friday the 19th, we saw a Great Awakening. I came here with my friend, the Patriot pastor, Garrett Lear, and he preached for another Great Awakening, which would be our country's fifth such Great Awakening. And we also had a rude awakening at the same time with all of the martial law that was going on in Boston. So we have clearly been given a choice here, America, either another Great Awakening or a rude awakening in the rudest possible way. We are under judgment, and we should know that. Now, Patriot pastor Garrett Lear, you can see his entire call for a Great Awakening, Water from the Well at YouTube. The Patriot pastor speaks in Lexington, Massachusetts on April 19th, 2013, Anno Domini, year of our Lord. So, we need that Great Awakening. It's either going to be a Great Awakening or a rude awakening. That generation would want us to first wake up to the power, truth, and love of Jesus Christ. Now, once you have done that, there are a lot of lazy Christians that are just laying about and doing nothing these days. Now, they would have known about the book of Ephesians, and it says in the book of Ephesians, it says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." Those who fought the American Revolution knew there was a spiritual war going on. And just as those today, we must realize there is a spiritual dimension to that. And those of us who have come against those powers directly, we feel it. So, if you accept Jesus Christ died on your behalf at Calvary, and that he was resurrected for you in your place, that is step one. That is step one, to have his salvation. And with that, you get more discernment. And with that, you get more peace. And with that, you get backup. We need some backup in this war. That is how someone like Alex Jones can stand up against the gates of hell. That is how someone like my good friend Daniel, what a Daniel he is too, Daniel Badandi, can stand against the powers of evil in Boston that have brought this horrible tragedy against us. And without Jesus, we're not going to make it. So that's the first point I want to make right here on the grave of Reverend John Hancock, who was a great pastor of the First Great Awakening. And will you please go to Water from the Well at YouTube and see the pastor's call for a new Great Awakening in America. Paul Revere was about waking people up. That would be the first thing. Paul was the son of the Great Awakening. He went to a charismatic Western church. He would want you to be part of that Great Awakening too. We are environed by the occult these days. When Alex Jones of Infowars.com did his expose out on Bohemian Grove, he found them worshiping a 45-foot stone statue of a demonic Canaanite owl called Molech, object of God's hatred and eternal wrath throughout the Old Testament, as sometimes the Hebrews would turn to this Canaanite god and sacrifice their children to Molech, and that was a big no-no. And they still worship that god out at Bohemian Grove, and these are the power elite from all over the world. Now, in a more parochial sense, the Super Bowl. Why do we need a demonologist to watch the halftime at the Super Bowl? Why are they showing us, witches, warlocks on Disney? Every single movie is about being a witch, a warlock. And for the halftime show at the Super Bowl, it kind of looks like the Great Whore of Babylon. So for those of you that aren't believers, one thing I would recommend is a powerful documentary by Lee Strobel, who was a lawyer in the Middle West and not a believer. And he thought he would investigate and interrogate the life of Jesus Christ to see if it was true. His documentary is called The Case for Christ. I believe it's on Netflix. It's something you should see. Now I want to say something to people that I call my friends the grace potatoes. In other words, you're a Christian, you're saved, and maybe you're scared for what's going on, you're just waiting for Jesus to come back. He didn't want you to do that. And if you read the parable of the talents, which are the talents that he gives you, a talent was also a silver piece, he wants you to take action. What I quoted from the Ephesians, we're supposed to fight evil as Christians. And while we get our grace and our salvation is by grace, we can't do anything to earn that. There are also separate judgments on our actions, which is called the reward, I believe, in the book of Revelation. So we are also judged separately, on our actions, and that's probably for what we're going to be doing in the kingdom. So you want to push a broom in the kingdom, keep doing nothing, all you grace potatoes. You need to get busy. Also, Romans 13. I have another take on Romans 13. Romans 13, it talks about the powers, and so forth, and obeying them. In America, look what our Constitution, which is the law of the land, starts with we the people. We the people are the first line of defense. We are the last line of defense. And basically, we're in such a mess because we're not doing our job as enforcers. So, on that note, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to give you a little quiz right now. So here is the Bill of Rights, our Bill of Rights, and here's the question. And you can use the Bill of Rights at home to answer this. So, how many rights are granted in the Bill of Rights? A, 10. You have 10 amendments, so 10 basic rights. Some are clumped together. B, 27. There are 27 specifically referred to. C, unlimited. Unlimited number of rights. The Ninth Amendment enumeration says this is not all the rights you have. Other rights not mentioned, right to own property, right to own a business. So really it's unlimited number of rights are granted here. Or D, 0. So here we are, Info Warriors, on historic Lexington Battle Green. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened on that fateful day. So, first of all, this is the oldest war memorial in the country. It was put up during the administration of John Adams. And it is also the gravesite of all those brave soldiers who refused to lay down their arms that day and were mowed down by an entire regiment of British with some 36, just one company of men against a whole regiment. They were just standing their ground, which was their right, which was their tradition. The militia tradition here in New England was 150 years old, and they were just standing their ground. They just wanted to make sure they knew these troops were coming through here, that, no death or destruction or rape and pillage happening, so they were just making a show. They didn't mean to start a war, but when they were told to drop their arms, they did not. They were slowly dispersing, and then the British fired on them and mowed them down. One of them, one Jonathan Harrington, he made it to his house, which is right over there. He died right at his wife's footsteps, right at that doorstep, right there. That was his house, and he's buried right here. So this is the Lexington Battle Green. And then what happened later on that day, of course, they went up to Concord, and by that time all the different militia companies had massed together in an army, and at Concord Bridge they were able to start to push them back. I had an ancestor by the name of Wright that hit them in a place called the Bloody Angle, and got revenge for what they did here. And we sent them all the way back to Boston. We whipped them good, and they never came back out here after that. They learned their lesson. So on this past Friday the 19th, we were kept off of this green. I was actually at the hearing with the selectman and the select woman, and she was very, very abusive. I mean, not just calling, we had a safety emergency here in New England, but she went out of her way to talk about what happened at Waco 20 years ago, what happened at Oklahoma City, and basically saying that it was our fault, the Patriot community. I thought that was totally inappropriate and not befitting her as a select woman, and not in the spirit of Lexington either. So we were kept off of this green, so we went and we gave our Great Awakening sermon back where we were, back there. But, maybe that's the way that God wanted it. Maybe it's not a time for too much pride right now. It's a time for repentance, and fasting and prayer. I am proud. I'm proud to memorialize these guys that took a stand here, though. And I'm grateful to give you a little bit of the history. Here we are in front of historic Buckman Tavern. Back in the day, a tavern would have served both as an inn where you could sleep and a place where the patriots could meet and imbibe. And Paul Revere, of course, made a lot of great silver craft, and one of the things, if he was known for nothing else, his silver is amazing. It's in the Museum of Fine Arts. It's just really beautiful. And I was amazed as a historian when I saw the tankard, which would hold a gallon of beer, one of Paul Revere's solid silver tankards, and just to hold that sucker up without the beer in it, but they would drink a gallon of very strong beer. They weren't shy about that, of what George Washington called refreshments back in those days. And anyway, so it was here that we had to meet the other day. We weren't allowed on Lexington Green when we had our rally for the Constitution and the Second Amendment. Larry Pratt, President of Gun Owners of America, said a wonderful prayer for our troops, and Stuart Rhodes made a statement for the Second Amendment, the one amendment that protects, that's the teeth in the Bill of Rights, that protects all the other amendments, and without that, we're like a cat without claws, and, we're just a joke at that point. So here we are at the corner of historic Lexington Green, and this is the famous statue of the Minuteman, John Parker, and it is our symbol of the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And for some reason, on April 19th, due to an order of the selectmen, I don't blame the police, we were kept away. Larry Pratt was our guest, and Stuart Rhodes, and they wouldn't let Larry have a picture with the Lexington Minuteman. Larry is, of course, the president of Gun Owners of America, the only no-compromise national gun group in this country, and we salute Larry for coming out here. It was a very pressure-filled day, but yeah, the selectmen, and I was there, as I said, I was there at the hearing, and she does not want any patriotic statements, any political statements about the Constitution made here in Lexington, and they're actually thinking of doing away with having any visiting groups have any rallies here or any free speech whatsoever. That's going to be totally disallowed because Lexington has totally turned its back on its history.
A couple days ago, I was called by Stuart and Randy Swanson to try and lend a hand to Steve Redfern and his rally on the Lexington Green, and I've reviewed the record, I've reviewed everything that the Lexington Board of Selectmen did, and I can unequivocally say that I think it's a gross constitutional violation, and we're going to fight this all the way. We're going to get a ruling that this is unconstitutional, whether it's through the state courts or the federal courts, and and I can say unequivocally that the reason this was denied, in my opinion, was based on the content of our message. And That is strictly forbidden by the Constitution, and we're going to get that declared as such.
So here I am at the home of Reverend Jonas Clark, and it was on that night of April 18th that Paul Revere came riding up this road from the Green, where we just were. And so the British were out to do two things that day. They were out to take the guns, that is the heavy artillery that were being stored out at the colonial capital of Concord. And those guns were actually seized by the New Hampshire Patriots sometime earlier from the fort of William and Mary. And there was a lot of skirmishing going on with the coastal forts, and they took some, and the British took some, and it was back and forth. So there was posturing going on for war. And so the British wanted to go out and get those artillery. The other thing they wanted to do was to arrest two very important patriots, John Hancock and Sam Adams. If they can arrest those two guys, game over. Revere came out here yelling, "The regulars are out, the regulars are out." And Hancock and Adams were right in there. And this brings up an important level of protection, several levels of protection, which the colonials had that we don't. Number one, they had a colonial militia system which was there in place for 150 years. Every town had a company. They elected their militia captain. In this town, it was John Parker. Dr. Edwin Vieira has spoken of, and I actually gave a speech when we inaugurated Oath Keepers in 2009, a speech of Dr. Vieira's on Lexington Green, where he called for a reestablishment of the traditional old constitutional militias. The other thing that they had at that time that we don't have now is a protective legal layer, the committees of correspondence. So, as the tyranny started to build, you had judges, you had lawyers, you had lawmakers in the colonial system, and they started to communicate with one another about the tyranny that was coming and what they're going to do about it. And this was all up and down the coast, and these people later became the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And Paul Revere was a courier rider for those committees of correspondence. And I was talking to Stuart Rhodes. We need that again today, and I thought he had a winning template with Oath Keepers, but we need another committee of correspondence of patriotic judges and lawyers and lawmakers at the federal level, like Rand Paul, at the state level, like Dan Itza or Charles Key, and at the local municipal level, all starting to integrate, to coordinate, to communicate, and when we have these big false flag events, to investigate, to call grand juries, to call in members of the CIA, the FBI, anyone that was involved that day, interrogate them separately, and find out what actually happened. So I'm calling for a new committees of correspondence, or you could call it the LJLC, lawyers, judges, and lawmakers for the Constitution. But we need that legal protective layer. I did talk about that with Stuart Rhodes. Alex, maybe you want to put together a roundtable discussion with Stuart, Dr. Edwin Vieira, Timothy Baldwin, maybe Naomi Wolf, and talk about what happens to a nation's legal system during a police state, during martial law. And let's get some outstanding lawyers involved in this. Who's going to be the John Adams of his day, of this day, to set that up and protect us legally so we don't have to get to the physical level, which we saw last Friday and last Monday in Boston. We don't want it to come to that, so we need this new committees of correspondence type organization. Anyway, Paul Revere came on out here, and he did warn those patriots, even though they wanted to take a stand too on the Green, they were too important. And so they were able to escape that day. The other thing about that, there were multiple riders that night. There was William Dawes, and there's a poem about William Dawes. It says, "Nobody remembers me because his name's Revere and my name's Dawes." Dawes got here a couple minutes after Revere. He just missed his shot at history there. But anyway, this is reenacted every year right before Patriots Day. And then they have a reenactment on Battle Green which I saw this year, which is pretty amazing, too. All those are free. If you happen to be here in Lexington, it's a great Patriot vacation, and it's almost like another Halloween. All the kids are out, the families, it's a lot of fun. All right, Midnight Riders, very special treat today. We have the concept of a Patriot vacation. If you're a Patriot, why not go someplace, go to a major Patriot event. Come see the 4th of July, for example, fireworks on the Charles. Another way to spend a great week here in New England, if you love the Constitution, is to attend Camp Constitution.
Right.
And I have here today the director of that camp, Hal Shurtleff. Hal, tell us a little bit about Camp Constitution.
Well, Camp Constitution is a week-long family camp. It's in the town of Rindge, New Hampshire, which has a lot of colonial history in itself. It's not too far; it's right over the Massachusetts line, and it's all volunteer organization. And in addition to the wonderful classes and great instructors like Garrett Lear, the Patriot pastor, and many other people.
I'm teaching a course on Paul Revere. The
That's
kids
right.
love Paul Revere, and one on the importance of the Union at an advanced class.
And we'll have some.
My
we'll have a
fourth
couple
year
of-
up there, I love it up there.
We'll have a couple of reenactors dressing up in colonial outfits and doing their thing. Usually field trips to Concord Bridge and Lexington Paddle Site, and maybe a few others. A few years ago, we visited the boyhood home of the original Uncle Sam Wilson, which is not too far from
Right.
camp. And we
Uncle
also
Sam, was he in Vermont or New Hampshire? I
No, he
forget.
was born in Arlington, Massachusetts.
Arlington, Mass.
And he actually settled in Troy, New York, where he became
Okay, but where was that house that we
Mason,
visited?
New Hampshire.
Mason, New
Which
Hampshire.
is not too far from our camp. And so, again, it's an all-volunteer entity, and it's a great week. It's reasonably priced.
What week is it this year?
It's July 6th to the 12th.
6th to the 12th. I should emphasize, entire families come up to the camp.
That's right.
It's not just kids. It's a family event. It is a Christian camp. There are prayers. We go into the Constitution in depth. We go into the biblical foundations of our nation.
That's right. One of our featured instructors is Reverend Stevie Kraft from Harlem.
Yeah.
And he's sort of an unforgettable individual.
Yeah. If you ain't had black preaching like Stevie Kraft, you haven't lived, honestly. And I almost wish he was here to speak because, man, he's very emphatic and he's very colorful and he tells it like it is.
That's right.
And so how much is it? It's very reasonably
Well,
priced.
the highest end would be $330. That would be for an unaccompanied minor,
Right.
between 12 and 17. And that includes everything. It includes the lodging, the food, the field trips, with the exception of maybe a camp picture and some snacks and incidentals like that.
$330 for a week,
good.
and then for the parents that come with their
It's,
children?
it depends. It depends on the age of the children. Under 11, it's a lot. It's like $160. If it's under 11 and under, 3 and under are free.
Wow.
Parents may pay about the same price, but if they serve as counselors, then it goes down to around $225. But no, we're all volunteer. We rely on in order to make.
I ain't
sure.
getting paid, but I
That's
love it.
right. Well, none of us get, but we take time off from work
Yeah.
to go there. But to me, my whole family goes. It's the highlight of their year, and we've got families coming as far as Western Michigan, and they drive here and they just look forward to it. And I get calls from the parents say, "We're counting down the days to camp."
Yeah.
And they just love the area. They love the region and what
We climb
what
Mount
happens.
Monadnock. We do some canoeing some years.
And
We're swimming.
the purpose of the camp is a lot of fun. You learn a lot, but it's also to help train the next generation of freedom.
Of patriots, yeah.
Freedom leaders in the freedom movement. And our motto is honoring the past, preparing the future.
Listen, my children, and you will hear the midnight ride of Paul Revere. So begins that famous poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that made Paul Revere a national figure. You see, back in the middle 19th century, there were no rock stars, there were no quarterback Super Bowl heroes, there were your poets, there were your authors. Those were the rock stars, and this was one of them, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. But you know what? He never referred to this as his house. No. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow always referred to this as the general's house, because several generations before Henry lived here, this was first a house on Tory Row, the very wealthiest of the loyalists to King George. the War for Independence came and they skedaddled back to London, and this house here became the very first headquarters of General George Washington. This is where he first felt the great responsibility of the entire nation upon his shoulders. That was his war room. His map room was back behind that. This front drawing room is where he celebrated his 17th wedding anniversary with his wife, Martha, but he was really feeling the pressure. Lexington and Concord had already happened. Bunker Hill had happened, and now he is coming down, up from Virginia rather, to take charge of the troops. And what a huge responsibility that was. And he was the very first kind of voice of America, you know, and he was the symbol of this new revolution and winning independence and winning our freedoms. And then later, when Longfellow lived here, he was kind of, for a while, the voice of America, too, as a poet, as its leading poet. And he actually wrote The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War, because he could tell that our country was headed for another monster crisis. Here we are on Cambridge Common, under the famous tree where George Washington swore in the troops, and they went from being the various militias companies in New England to the First Continental Army. That was July 3rd, 1775, a year before American independence was actually declared, but we were fighting for it. Now, here we are 238 years later, and this whole area in Cambridge and Boston was put under lockdown, was put under martial law for the first time since those days when the British were controlling the area. You know, what have we really come to? What would George Washington, the founder of our country, say if he was here?
That will happen again if you come try taking our guns. That's right. The answer to 1984 is 1776, baby! And like I told those criminal scum, and like Alex Jones told that British twit, Piers Morgan, a guy who comes to our country and says we have to give up our guns, you know what? You know, like Alex Jones told him, don't try what your ancestors failed at. And he told him one thing, which is very powerful. If you treat anybody, I don't care if you're law enforcement, you're federal agents, you're the government, okay? You come try to take our guns, 1776 will commence again!
So we're on Cambridge Common. Harvard University is right over there. Abe didn't go to Harvard. He didn't go anywhere. Just like George Washington, he was self-taught. And there's a book called Abraham Lincoln Among the Yankees. So Abraham Lincoln came up here to stump for Zachary Taylor, another great president who was probably assassinated by the Illuminati. And he came up again right before, like in 1860, he came up and he was giving great speeches. When they first would see him, he was all gangly and he had this long frock coat. He looked like, you know, kind of a Victorian Undertaker or something. And they were like, you know, really horrified by this Western kind of Southern kind of hillbilly, you know. And then he would start speaking and he had this cadence. And then by the end of the speech, they would do anything to keep him there to speak longer. And that's the effect that he had on people, and he spoke very clearly. But the one thing, we were talking a lot about Washington, over half of Washington's farewell address is about maintaining the Union and the importance of the Union. And it's just such an important thing that we stay together. You know, here in New England, for example, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, we grow the least of our own food. Yeah, so if the southern truckers stop trucking the food in, it turns into Zombieville around here in a matter of 2 weeks. You know, absolutely true. The commerce that we all share, that's huge. What we have left that hasn't been shipped overseas. The arts, the artistic. In the Ron Paul Revolution, we just saw the blimp effort, the limo effort, people going across the country, the great signs, the great artistic effort that came from all across the grand majestic reaches of the Union. And that's what George Washington wanted, and that's what this man maintained. Now, and one thing I can say is usually when a president gets shot or assassinated in office, like Zachary Taylor, like Abraham Lincoln, like John Fitzgerald Kennedy, usually when they get shot, they're doing something good for the country.
So my ancestor, Thomas Dudley, was a founder of Cambridge and Harvard. He was actually the colonial governor who signed the charter to Harvard University. And their very first motto was Veritas Christo et Ecclesiae, which means the truth for Christ and His church. And it's interesting that the good Lord got kicked out of Harvard in 1843. They just kicked him right off the motto, and then it's just Veritas, truth. Whose truth? What truth? And John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the son of Harvard. He went to Harvard, and when he died, Harvard didn't really investigate that truth, and their corporate chieftains made a lot of money on Vietnam. And it's interesting that my 9/11 Truth group put on a JFK event with the author James Douglas, who wrote a book called JFK and the Unspeakable, about what really happened to our 35th president. And it was we had this event at Harvard Epworth Church, right on the edge of the campus. We flyered the campus. We passed out, pamphlets, we postered it, we advertised online. Nobody came. Nobody from Harvard came, and we put in a lot of effort, and nobody came, and nobody cared. So and now, walking around the campus, we see the flag flying at half-mast, and it seems like the flag is flying at half-mast a lot of the time now. And Harvard, do you really stand for the truth? Do you really look at why that flag is flying at half-mast, and ask the questions behind what happened in Newtown, Connecticut, and down at Boston at the finish line, and at 9/11. And so it's important for us. Paul Revere used his creative energies. He was actually the lithographer behind the Boston Massacre, lithograph, and a lot of us from the Ron Paul Revolution came up with our own creative efforts. And one of the things that I did with my co-host Scott Donito was create a podcast called The Midnight Ride, www.themidnightridecast.com. And one of the neat things we did was interview John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And here's a little track as we walk across Harvard Yard of John Kennedy. And we're talking to him about history. And then we have to send him back to 1963.
But Sam Houston, he was a different story, and he's also profiled in my book, Profile in Courage. The great founding hero of Texas was, in the final analysis, an American first and a Texan second. In 1857, he was dismissed from his Senate seat by the Texas legislature. It was then that he declared, and I'm quoting here, "I wish no prouder epitaph to mark the board or slap that may lie upon my tomb than this. He loved his country. He was a patriot. He was devoted to the Union. It is for this that I have suffered martyrdom." Beautiful quote, but
yes.
A great patriot.
So, was that the last that Texas or America ever saw him?
No, Scott, Sam Houston had a hell of a lot more fight left in him. He went back home to Texas, and he fought a bitter campaign for governor. When Lincoln was elected president, Texas seceded, and all were required to take a loyalty oath to the Confederacy, all except the governor himself, who declared, and I'm quoting here, "Fellow citizens, In the name of your rights and liberty, which I believe have been trampled upon, I refuse to take this oath. In the name of my own conscience and my own manhood, I refuse to take this oath. I love Texas too well to bring civil strife and bloodshed upon her, unquote. Sam Houston ended his career by standing by the Union in the name of safety and common sense, and everyone else in his home state had war fever. Now that, my friends, is a true profile of courage.
So in closing, Mr. President, what do you see as the primary value of exploring American history?
Well, John, history isn't a guide to the present, but in the archives building down Pennsylvania Avenue, there's a stone plaque which says, "What's past is prologue." While history doesn't give us a key to the future, I think it does give us a sense of confidence in the future. This country has passed through very difficult days, but it has passed through them. And it is rather interesting to realize that we are a rather old republic, probably the oldest republic in the world. When we were founded, there was a king in France, the Tsar in Russia, an emperor in Peking. All that's been wiped away, and that this country continues and will continue in the future. We in the present, both those that are in politics and those of you who study us, and record what we did right or what we may have done wrong. We represent a long effort, building on the lives and contributions of all the great American people of the past. So our history is a source of strength to us. And anything which dramatizes the great story of the United States, such as this website, I feel is worthy of our closest attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And unfortunately, now we have to go ahead and send the president back to his speech in Amherst in late October 1963. Good luck, and thank you so much, President John F. Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Tom, Scott, and John, and it was great to meet the three of you. Now we can get back to that speech in Amherst. It was a beautiful day. We're all remembering Robert Frost, the importance of the arts. And I look forward to an America which will not be afraid of grace and beauty. I look forward to an America which will reward achievement in the arts as we reward achievement in business or statecraft. And I look forward to an America which demands respect throughout the world, not only for its strength, but for its civilization as well. I look forward to a world.
Now the trumpets summon us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though embattled we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. John F. Kennedy inaugural address, January 20th, 1961.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light, once so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight? Although ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
So I studied psychology at BU, and that's sort of an interest of mine. And let me ask you a question. Why did they kill John Fitzgerald Kennedy so publicly? He'd had his last rites over the course of his life like 4 or 5 times. It would have been much easier to poison him or kill him privately. Why did they do it at 12 noon in front of the entire nation in Dealey Plaza in Dallas? Well, it wasn't just to get JFK out of the way. The other reason was to traumatize the entire society. This is called trauma-based mind control, and it's a very important thing to understand. So, when 9/11 happened, my mom and I kind of figured it out pretty soon, and I was like, wow, that's it. This country is going down. There's nothing we can do about it. And my mom kind of slapped me around, and basically she said, you know what, this country has reserves. You just have to break that trance. You have to, you have to get into that very deep patriotism that lies in all Americans. All of us are descended from folks that couldn't take it over there. We have that in our DNA, that we're the descendants of those who wouldn't take the tyranny over there, and we're over here. And my mom was like, you just got to restart that. And that's what the Ron Paul revolution did. It was kind of like an emergency generator that kicked in. You had all these spark plugs from all over the country, firing, and then all of a sudden the engine kicks in. But it's an emergency generator, and we're still on that emergency generator. We haven't quite had the restart of the main motor, and that's what we're trying to do here, to break through those trances and to get that started again. So back to the psychological angle. At the Tavistock Institute, they studied this back in the 30s, and it's interesting that when they had the 7/7 bombing in London, one of the buses was exploded outside the old home of Tavistock Institute. So, one of the main researchers into trauma-based mind control was a guy named Leonard Lewin. And Jim Keith studied Lewin, and what Jim Keith said in his book, Mind Control, World Control, was if terror can be introduced on a widespread basis into a society, then society reverts to a tabula rasa, a blank slate, a situation where control can easily be instituted from an external point. He termed this societal chaos fluidity. So now we have fluidity, we have terror introduced on a widespread basis, just like they planned out at Tavistock Institute in London a long time ago. And I listened to my mom and I got active. And I became active in the hardest thing to be active in, and that was 9/11 Truth. Here at my alma mater, Boston University, and I'm proud because we had this event here at BU, and Harvard did not have that event. We had David Ray Griffin, the renowned theologian and 9/11 Truth, father of 9/11 Truth, along with Alex Jones of Infowars.com. And he spoke here at historic Morris Hall at Boston University several years ago. I was the master of ceremonies. And I have to say, the most amazing part of that event was after we, discoursed about 9/11 Truth to this audience in Boston, we then all went to Pizzeria Uno, and I got to sit with David. He's so smart about so many different subjects. I just got to sit there and talk to him for an hour about everything except 9/11 Truth, about metaphysics, about theology, and it was just a real joy. And that's one of the things, if you get involved, is you meet these great minds, and what a kick that is. What a crazy, campy kick in the head to hang out with these people, and that's how I get paid for doing this stuff. Dr. Martin Luther King was a reverend. He was a man of God. He saw injustice in this country, and he stood up against it, even when he was acting against the law. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that his conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. This said Dr. Martin Luther King. How many of you would consider an earlier patriot and crusader against injustice part of your top 10 list for patriots? I'm speaking of Harriet Tubman, a Moses to her people. With a gun in one hand, she led over 300 slaves to freedom from the other. And She said of her train to freedom, she never lost a passenger. Wow, if I have even one-tenth of her courage, I will be all set for life. Anyway, this is an interesting point. So why did she carry a gun in one hand? Was she going down there to shoot the slave master or the overseer? No, that wasn't her purpose. She was not a murderer. The thing is when people had been on a plantation, and a plantation mentality and a slave mentality, a lot of times when she would free them, they would get a little bit nervous. They would want to go back to the plantation. But when you got on Harriet's train, that train was not turning around. That train was going to freedom, and the gun was just to settle them down, to let them know that. Now, many of us are awakening things to things going on in this society, and we see that train to freedom. We see what we should do. We see what direction we should go, but it's very hard to come off that plantation mentally. It's very, very hard to do. And this is what Harriet Tubman did, literally, with those slaves, and this is what we have to do. This is what we have to do as an American, is to break out of that plantation slave mindset. And it's not only easy, but we can definitely take a great lesson from both of these great African Americans. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to historic Fenway Park, the last of the old great ballparks in America. This park opened in April of 1912, the same weekend the Titanic sank. Yes, indeed. So some of us wonder, are we on the Titanic now with this republic? And I have to say, looking around, the answer is maybe. But is it not noble then to stay aboard, and get as many folks to the lifeboats as we can? The first lifeboat being our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And the next lifeboats being, to get folks to safety as this unfolds. And maybe Alex Jones is like the wireless operator, tapping out the SOS. Is that not noble? Even if people don't wake up, even if we don't wake up in time, I find that very noble, Alex, that we're doing that, and we're staying and we're keeping the lights on the ship, as it gets steeper and steeper and steeper. Anyway, Fenway Park. So Jack Kennedy is with a friend here once, and this is back in the 40s, and he bet against the friend that Teddy Ballgame, Ted Williams of the Red Sox, would not hit a home run. Well, Ted Williams did hit a home run, and Jack Kennedy lost that bet. The great thing about Ted Williams was he served nobly in World War II and again in Korea. And if he had been, he was on a pace then to beat Babe Ruth's record for the number of home runs, but that didn't matter to him. What mattered more, and what he thought more of than actually being a ball player, was being a patriot and serving his country. How many of us could take a lesson from that today, to be that patriot and not put the sports first? How many are just putting the sports first and putting the patriotism on hold? The greatest hitter of America's greatest game and our national pastime thought that being a patriot was more important. Now, Alex Jones has coined this war that we're in an information war, and we're winning it right now. Hopefully the internet won't get taxed and taken over, but we're winning that. Now, how can you be more effective in this information war? Well, I'll tell you what I did. I joined Toastmasters. Toastmasters is an American, now international public speaking club where you learn how to speak really fast on your feet with something called table topics, how to run a meeting, Robert's Rules of Order, leadership. As you're going through the Toastmaster program, which can be done in as little as 6 months, you're also telling the leaders of tomorrow, the leaders in your community, about liberty. So you're learning to speak more effectively, to communicate more effectively when we have to talk to the media, when we host large-scale events like the ones that I later emceed with David Ray Griffin at Morse Hall, with Rand Paul in the first original Tea Party downtown at Faneuil Hall, Lexington Green, you name it. I learned that at Toastmasters, and while I was learning, I was leading others to patriotism. So when you go through Toastmasters with a tricorn hat on, either literally or figuratively, that's how you can turn a quick double play against the Illuminati. There is the famous Lord and Taylor rooftop. We had the Lord and Taylor cameras and also the famous paramilitary folks up on top of that roof. Marathon Place, Marathon Sports, the windows that were blasted out.
Ron Paul said one person can make a difference, and that one person is you. You can make a difference. You can be here in Massachusetts or in Texas, but you can go out, you can organize, you can mobilize, you can educate, you can train, you can teach activists.
Make phone calls, stand at the polls,
Yeah.
and especially in special elections, which is how Ron Paul got elected first in Texas. Hardly anybody shows up, so there a small number of people, even here in liberal Massachusetts, can put the candidate over the edge. What else? So Campaign for Liberty is watching and helping for all of these different candidates across the country. How did Campaign for Liberty help Leah Cole?
Well, through training. They can't directly help a candidate, but they can train people. You know, we have that motto: recruit, educate, train, organize, mobilize. Well, they trained, not just her, but many people, to know how to effectively organize and mobilize so that we can get her message of fiscal responsibility in front of the right people, and then we can make sure they get out to the polls on Election Day. Mm-hmm. And it was those trainings that Campaign for Liberty had that really made the difference. We learned how to try to get media attention. We learned how to make connections with the Herald, the Globe, the television stations. Even Rachel Maddow, somebody made it on there. Just to explain,
we were able to get some of our delegates reinstated that way.
Yes, through the noise that we made in the public opinion, we were able to show the heartless and coldness and the cheating, basically, of the establishment handling the Republican Party in Massachusetts.
Brad is a businessman that was actually kind of put out of business because of strong regulation, too strong of regulations, and so forth. Some regulations are important. I thought Glass-Steagall was an important thing, but really you want to focus on the fascist kind of crony capitalism. Is that the word for it? That Ron Paul talks about, where the fix is in, as opposed to competitive free market mom and pops capitalism. And speaking of that, Paul Revere, this is a Paul Revere documentary. Paul Revere, after we won independence, he and the Patriots realized that as long as we had to import all of our finished goods, we would never be a real country. We would always be a colony where you export the raw materials and then you have to import all your stuff from England and France where they made it. So they realized that made in USA was priority one. This is one place I differ with the libertarians, and I kind of believe, as they did back then, in a protective tariff. Now, I'll speak on that before Brad does. That's not his thing. But the protective tariff, basically, before NAFTA, which was very unfair to some businesses, in 1994, you could buy a widget for $10 made in America, and then you could buy one in China or elsewhere after the tariff for like $9.50, and it was an inferior product, basically. So once NAFTA came in, how can you paying decent wages where your workers could put their kids through college, how can you compete with Chinese slave labor, Brad? Is that possible?
No, you can compete with a company. You can't compete with a country. When a country requires health care and you have the highest costs in Massachusetts, when you have the highest energy costs in the state, in the country, I think New Jersey, Hawaii may be higher, when you have high unemployment insurance costs, when you have all these mandates from the state on legal things, triple damages if you do somebody's wages wrongs, there's so many overheads that it just is not cost effective to invest in Massachusetts or America at that point in time. If they just concentrated on what the real problems were, that would be great. Unfortunately, they just keep making more regulations and more regulations and more regulations, which creates more bureaucratic jobs for the cronies up there in D.C. and Beacon Hill.
So that's one thing you look for a politician that's running that has the word repeal in his vocabulary, and that's the rarest word in politics. I think when Jesse Ventura was governor in Minnesota, I don't think he did this, but one thing he was calling for, he said, why don't we just have 1 year when we just repeal a lot of bad laws?
I'm not a legislature, but it sounds good to me, because there's a lot of bad laws out there. I don't know what the solution is, but I know this path will not be sustainable, not for the next future generations like my daughter, and we've got to change that path, and that's what Ron was trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully Rand will too. I think I foresee Rand Paul running for president in 2016. Everybody doesn't like everything that he stood for. He is one thing that Rand does, I have to say, that Ron didn't do so much is he builds coalitions. And he does that so that we can have a shot at a decent constitutional president in 2016. What do you think of his chances in 2016?
I think they're terrific. And when we went down to Campaign for Liberty training, they said, you've got to, if you want to be involved, you have to understand that there's no two people who agree 100% on everything. So you will disagree with Ron or Rand or Justin Amash or whoever it is sometime. It doesn't mean you go out and bash them. So if you find a candidate you think believes in the Constitution and is willing to push it, you'd darn well be ready to back them, because most of the people down there don't.
Coming up on the State House on Beacon Hill, look at that beautiful gilded dome. Underneath that is copper done by Paul Revere to keep it from leaking. And it's important to go and lobby your state house like we did with the help of Alex Jones of Infowars.com when we were lobbying against the shot bill. We also had a number of Constitution Day events in September, and we just reanimated, and you can do this in a lot of your state houses. They will let you do ceremonial rallies around liberty, which we do every year on Constitution Day, and then we get some of the legislators to give a speech on the Constitution, and then you have the whole freedom dialogue going on in the State House. And now, of course, we have to lobby to get a state investigation of what happened during the marathon. If there had been a state investigation in Texas for JFK, it probably would have solved it right away. When you have the federal investigations, it's more likely to be a cover-up. Now, that's Joseph Hooker, the guy in horseback. I rank him among the top 10 Southern Confederate generals because he was so inept. He got so many killed. There he is. And that behind him, believe it or not, is called the Joseph Hooker entrance. The Hooker entrance is where the politicians walk into the State House, and then they walk in and they sell out, and that's called the Hooker entrance. And ain't that the freaking truth? Here's the back of it. Palladium. These are newer wings to the State House. But yeah, go into your State House, visit your state reps, your state senators, get to know them, express yourself. You know, they hardly get, what people don't know is when you call your senator, either U.S. or state senator, or you go, especially go to visit them, that doesn't just count as you, that counts as many thousands of people with the same opinion, because they realize that for every person that expresses the opinion, there are so many thousands that don't. They have bean counters to figure these things out.
Constitution of the United States and the Commonwealth. In regards to your oath, did you understand the gravity of it when you swore to it? And lastly, will you keep your oath by refusing unlawful orders to enforce such laws that infringe on the Constitution, specifically every single one of the Bill of Rights, intact and unmolested? Those are very important questions, folks, and I hope those that have sworn an oath consider them very carefully in the performance of their duties. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out and supporting the Second Amendment, letting these people working back here for us remember who they work for and remember the oath that they took. It's very important that you talk to them about the oath that they took, because to infringe on your Second Amendment rights, they are breaking that oath and they have to go over, under, around, like they talk about in D.C., that oath. So make sure you stand up, let them know that you remember the oath they took, and let them know that you're going to hold them to remembering. I'm here with Oath Keepers today, actually, so I know a lot about the oath. And I just wanted to read over the kinds of things you should be hearing from people who work for you who took the oath. Because these are the things that we stand for, and we will stand in between you and the oath breaker, making sure that it doesn't go any further. We will not obey orders to disarm the American people. We will not obey orders to conduct warrantless searches of the American people. We will not obey orders to detain American citizens as unlawful enemy combatants. That's without your Fourth Amendment protections, without your 10th Amendment protections. You've got to stand up for that. We will not obey orders to impose martial law or a state of emergency on a state.
The correct answer is actually, to the quiz we had earlier, is actually D, 0. No rights are granted. Your rights do not come from this document. Your rights come from your Creator God, and that is mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. You know, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, their powers granted by the Creator God. So your rights don't come from this. The soldiers of the American Revolution, they didn't have a constitution yet, but they knew what their rights were and they exercised them. Later they had that war for independence and they tried to cement these rights. This is to guarantee those rights, but it doesn't work unless you stand behind it. It starts with we the people. If you don't do anything, you're going to lose this. All this is a piece of paper without you standing behind it. Thank you, Patriots. You're awake now. You know the truth. You know what's going on. Are you going to be that Paul Revere, or are you going to let the sun set on your liberties forever? The year was 1775. The full moon was high in the sky. Are you ready to take that midnight ride?
The man that takes your freedom, he don't speak no Arabic. Freedom, mighty slick, and a man that takes your freedom, he don't speak no Arabic. Late last night in Lexington, I ran into Paul Revere. He said nobody's waking up to what's going on around here. Coming with us, we're going down without a fight. Freedom! Rider in the night. Now you're coming with us, we're going down without a fight. And we call upon you, Jesus, Son of Almighty God. But I know that you can save us till we remember just who you are. You gave us our freedom. You blessed us more than kings. Unto you all power and glory in this new great awakening. Give us our freedom. And you blessed us more than kings. Unto you all